At 6:19 inches the morning, roughly 140 miles off Venezuela's northern coastline, the supercarrier USS Gerald R. Ford sliced through calm Caribbean waters when a pair of Venezuelan fighter jets abruptly materialized on tracking screens. These weren't ordinary aircraft. They were attack jets operating at dangerously low elevations, offering no identification through IFF transponders or standard radio channels. The two Venezuelan K-8S executed sharp banking maneuvers across the strike group's forward position, thundering overhead as though practicing assault runs instead of conducting normal reconnaissance. Within the carrier's tactical operations room, warning systems activated and personnel snapped to attention. The screening vessels adjusted their formations, defensive systems elevated to maximum readiness, and American sailors understood they were facing a deliberate challenge. This wasn't an innocent overflight. To U.S. observers, this action appeared as intentional aggression, a brazen demonstration of capability, a declaration that Venezuelan military forces could approach one of Earth's most formidable warships unannounced. And critically, no one aboard the Ford anticipated this would mark merely the opening move in a far more hazardous chain of events. Nobody on board predicted what would unfold moments later, when the actual descent toward the battle group would command every observer's focus skyward and every weapon operator's attention to firing controls. To keep current on classified operations, tactical standoffs, and hidden maneuvers that alter the balance, subscribe to the Military Power Channel, because this narrative has only started. The arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford into U.S. Southern Command's operational zone transmitted an unmistakable message. On November 11, 2025, the carrier battle group penetrated the area with over 4,000 naval personnel embarked and scores of combat aircraft prepared for around-the-clock operations. From the Pentagon's viewpoint, this wasn't standard deployment, but component of a broader campaign to project authority, discourage criminal operations, and reinforce territorial security. Simultaneously, the administration in Caracas has grown increasingly bold conducting activities in what defense experts describe as hybrid zones, those ambiguous domains between peacetime and armed conflict, where nations challenge each other without triggering open warfare. For the Venezuelan leadership, dispatching fast jets near a U.S. battle group provides opportunity to demonstrate strength, secure propaganda victories, and evaluate American responses without launching ordnance. To grasp the implications, examine what the Ford symbolizes. As the flagship of its generation, the Gerald R., Ford-class nuclear carrier operates breakthrough technologies, a sophisticated detection array, electromagnetic launch systems, and the potential to maintain scores of combat missions daily. Simply stated, for the United States, it represents the pinnacle of maritime superiority, global reach, and oceanic dominance on a worldwide scale. Conversely, the Venezuelan aircraft in this encounter, a K-8W trainer attack platform, appears far less threatening. Designed for instruction with reduced velocity and dated systems, the K-8W isn't engineered for advanced warfare. However, it excels at the type of aggressive close-range tactics that generate international attention. The disparity couldn't be starker. On one hand, a floating stronghold packed with lethal capability. On the other, a regional nation prepared to gamble with peril to broadcast a statement. Why select the early dawn for this confrontation? A pre-dawn launch means reduced civilian traffic aloft, diminished radar interference, and superior conditions for capturing striking imagery. With morning illumination intensifying, it becomes simpler to record and distribute. This allows Caracas to magnify the account. We confronted the supercarrier and maintained our resolve. Meanwhile, from the American perspective, the tranquil sunrise meant any unannounced approach triggered alerts faster. As the carrier formation sailed north of Venezuela, the initial two Venezuelan jets had already penetrated close, sweeping across the battle group's front at extremely low elevation without radio identification. From the U.S. viewpoint, this was an exploratory maneuver, gauging how the Ford's protective screen would respond. But just as attention in the Tactical Operations Center was beginning to adjust, the unanticipated occurred. Detection systems registered two additional threats approaching rapidly from an alternate direction. In that instant, the circumstances transitioned from irregular to critical, when the second wave of contacts materialized on detection screens at approximately vector 217 degrees. The serenity of the Caribbean dawn had already dissolved into heightened tension. The first pair of Venezuelan K-8W aircraft had completed their crossbow maneuver above the strike formation. But for the personnel aboard the USS Gerald R forward and its guardian vessels that had registered as an initial probe. Now, with two more high-velocity signatures closing from a fresh heading, Washington's most sophisticated carrier battle group confronted not simple harassment, but possible intensification. Within moments, the Ford's command bridge authorized the launch of dual FA-18E Super Hornet interceptors. This decision was no longer standard procedure. It indicated that the United States was ready to engage if the situation breached acceptable boundaries. Simultaneously, the escort destroyers and cruisers modified their positions, consolidating the defensive perimeter surrounding the carrier. The deployment of these fighters and the adjustment of screening vessels highlighted a crucial juncture. The Americans were handling the incident as exceeding an aviation irritant. They addressed it as a security emergency with tactical consequences. What rendered the moment even more significant was what the thermal imaging revealed. Despite their aggressive tactics, the 4 Venezuelan jets displayed no munitions on their weapon stations. The intelligence suggested not a strike package, but an intentional demonstration of resolve by approaching close, fast, unidentified, and weaponless. The Venezuelan forces appeared determined to manufacture a spectacle, one that could be transmitted, analyzed, and exploited diplomatically. From the US standpoint, this was textbook hybrid conflict. Hostile but beneath the level of declared combat. Nonetheless, the Americans didn't dismiss it casually. The Hornets ascended swiftly, targeting systems activated, defensive configuration established. The Ford maintained steady bearing, radio transmissions limited except for mission-essential communications. The screening vessels assumed protective formations, and the carrier's personnel remained concentrated on the operational space. What the US refrained from doing, however, was attempting to destroy or electronically disable the Venezuelan aircraft. That discipline was itself a strategic decision, a conscious demonstration that overwhelming power doesn't necessarily demand kinetic action. Just as the situation appeared stabilized, an unexpected development occurred. One of the 4 Venezuelan jets separated from the remaining aircraft, dropping to remarkably low elevation. It performed an audacious, inverted approach directly toward the formation. From the observation deck, the massive carrier and its escorts watched as this solitary vapor trail carved across the atmosphere, screaming toward the forward section of a US destroyer. The flight path, velocity, and altitude combined to activate dangerous maneuvering warnings within the Ford's Tactical Operations Center. For an instant, it appeared that the entire carrier battle group had to suspend breathing. The approach wasn't an assault in the conventional definition. No weapons discharged, no targeting locked for ordnance release, but the boldness was undeniable. In that split-second sequence, the Venezuelan aviator had compressed all the hazard of warfare into a single spectacular maneuver. The US reaction once again remained measured. The Hornets tracked the aggressive jet. The screening vessels monitored its trajectory, and the carrier sustained zero alteration from its planned heading. More significantly, no defensive weapons were activated, thus maintaining the cautious threshold that the US aimed to establish. What transpired next extended beyond individual aircraft into a wider theater of presence and demonstration. As the Venezuelan jets started to withdraw, something on the Ford's detection array changed. For merely several seconds, a weapons radar signature from one of the Venezuelan contacts flickered onto the carrier formation. That momentary lock-on might not have constituted a missile preparation, but in naval aerial combat, it frequently functions as the electronic equivalent of a weapon being armed. The US personnel absorbed the communication. You are exposed, you are tracked, you are under surveillance. Yet, the US also transmitted its counter-communication. We do not respond impulsively, we respond with measured authority. When the aftermath of the incident settled, the Venezuelan jets exited the operational area, silent and unarmed. leaving behind a formation of vessels and aircraft that had maintained its trajectory. From the American perspective, this was neither failure nor direct combat success. It was a demonstration of determination and restraint. The Ford's capacity to withstand a daring low-elevation approach, sustain bearing, keep its escorts prepared, and deploy interceptors without escalating into total combat illustrated a strategic benefit that transcends the tactical. In essence, the four-jet closure unfolded less like aerial engagement and more like a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation. For Caracas, it was a hazard-laden performance. For Washington, it was a drill in composure under stress. The US warship had succeeded in the challenge, not by engaging first, but by holding position and allowing its capability to demonstrate itself. The morning tranquility shattered in an instant as the four Venezuelan jets converged on the USS Gerald R. Ford's strike formation. One of them broke from the group and executed a maneuver that appeared derived from individual audacity rather than standard operating procedure. Plunging from above 2,000 feet to below 1,000 feet within moments, the jet rolled, inverted, and dove straight toward a US destroyer, screening the carrier. Everything on the command deck intensified. Detection displays illuminated, warning tones activated, and systems flagged hazardous maneuver as the aircraft roared past at such proximity that personnel could practically observe rivets on the destroyer's superstructure. In response, the Ford's point defense weapon systems locked into automated tracking configuration. Their sensors concentrated on the rapidly advancing jet. This wasn't an exercise. The rotary cannon systems were moments away from transitioning into warning engagement state. Meanwhile, two deployed FA-18E Super Hornets accelerated to intercept elevation, yet procedures held. The Hornet aviators did not activate weapons radar onto the approaching Venezuelan aircraft. They sustained a defensive stance exclusively, precisely outlined by US engagement protocols to prevent transforming a provocative action into actual warfare. Even prior to the dive, US thermal sensors had verified all four Venezuelan jets lacked active ordnance on their weapons pylons. That information mattered. In the wordless realm of naval aviation, an unarmed penetration into proximity isn't a strike. It's a communication. It indicated that the Venezuelan operation was engineered not to eliminate, but to challenge and evaluate. By executing a high-velocity dive at extreme low elevation, approximately between 600 and 800 feet, the jet accomplished three objectives simultaneously. It compelled a reaction, generated dramatic documentation, and signaled that the Venezuelan aviator was prepared to compromise safety protocols without discharging a weapon. From the US standpoint, that dive represented considerably more than a stunt. It was a deliberate act of coercion. The combination of chronology, elevation, and target distance was textbook for a hazardous maneuver, a designation employed by naval specialists to characterize any flight trajectory that intentionally risks impact or demands a defensive reaction without crossing the boundary into armed assault. The carrier formation held trajectory, the escorts sustained formation, the Hornets shadowed. But the dive transmitted a distinct communication. Your endurance won't discourage us. You must react, or your deterrence is revealed. And yet, what astonished the Ford's personnel most was not the dive itself. Within moments of the jet ascending and departing, US detection systems identified a temporary electronic lock-on, a weapons paint from one of the Venezuelan aircraft. The importance was immediate. Though no missile was fired, the action of obtaining a target electronically is the maritime equivalent of preparing a weapon. It means you're designated, it means a communication has been transmitted, and the US interpreted it for what it was, a singular moment of electronic messaging layered atop an execution-style maneuver. In that crucial instant, the strike formation found itself in a hybrid arena, part aerial harassment, part electronic combat, part media spectacle. The Venezuelan jet that dove away departed the formation but had accomplished its objective. It had compelled a tracking response, activated defensive systems, and generated intelligence that could be interpreted by Caracas as proof of courage. The carrier formation did not discharge weapons, it did not alter course, it did not escalate. Instead, it sustained posture and pursued its mission. That composure, which superficially might appear passive, was actually active force projection, the capacity to absorb harassment without compromising strategic integrity. For the US, the conclusion was evident. Capability alone isn't sufficient. In contemporary sea control operations, restraint magnifies strength. By preventing a complete engagement, by resisting the impulse to engage first, the Ford formation imposed its own engagement protocols on the scenario. It didn't react from anxiety, but responded from doctrine. Meanwhile, for the Venezuelan aviators, their dive marked the peak of a deliberate test. They'd challenged the boundaries, solicited a response, and yet remained precisely beneath the threshold of warfare. The hazard had been substantial, but so was the gain. Temporary control of the narrative, footage to reinforce national identity, and a practice run for escalation. As the carriers and jets transitioned into the remainder of the morning's operations, the dive faded into routine aerial monitoring. But its influence persisted, not in the sound of ordnance, but in the activity of tracking radars, the silence of surveillance intelligence, and the imagery that would spread through both military analysis networks and media platforms. The engagement had not been won by force, but by authority. And frequently, in hybrid zones like the Southern Caribbean, authority matters more than firepower. The instant the 4 Venezuelan jets started to separate from the main strike formation, the crews aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford were already analyzing multiple dimensions of threat. But what occurred next transformed the encounter from aviation spectacle into comprehensive hybrid warfare. In the seconds following the low elevation dive, radar technicians on the Ford recorded a sudden illumination signal, a radar lock-on from one of the Venezuelan aircraft. Though no missile was discharged, the action itself activated one of the most critical alerts on a carrier's tactical operations center. Electronic target illumination means that the adversary's sensors have identified you, tracked you, and potentially prepared for engagement, all without launching a weapon. The Ford's radar registered the Venezuelan jet's tracking beam, directed specifically at the US formation for a brief 1 to 2 seconds. Instantly, the environment transformed. The carrier group's CIWS and escort vessels logged the signal as a step beyond routine harassment. It was a subtle but unmistakable communication indicating that the Venezuelan aircraft possessed the capability to lock onto the carrier formation. And this kind of hybrid zone signaling, hostile but remaining beneath the threshold of direct assault, is becoming a primary instrument in contemporary sea operations. States like Venezuela employ these signals to evaluate responses and manipulate the narrative to their benefit. The media subsequently reported on the broader US task force deployment in the Caribbean. According to the Associated Press, the Ford's deployment was component of a regional surge and was characterized as the largest concentration of US military power in generations near Venezuela. The radar lock-on therefore interpreted as a calculated part of that pressure tactic. Yet, the US reaction offers its own communication. The Ford maintained trajectory, sustained original velocity, and did not modify its bearing. The Hornets and escort vessels remained in defensive posture, neither escalating nor retreating. That steadiness was itself a selection. In strategic terms, by refusing to deviate, the US transmitted a signal: we are not astonished, we are not intimidated, and we will not permit ourselves to be manipulated into a trap. The fact that the carrier did not divert or discharge weapons despite bearing the electronic signal demonstrates that authority, not impulse, is the contemporary measure of force. The carrier's composure contrasted dramatically with the confrontational character of the Venezuelan move. The dive displayed audacity, the lock-on displayed intent. Combined together, they exposed a two-phase strategy. First, the spectacle to capture attention and compel reaction. Second, the digital engagement to evaluate thresholds. And although no weapon fired, the intelligence was gathered. The US formation revealed its arrangements and engagement protocols, all valuable intelligence for future confrontations. However, the narrative didn't conclude with the jet's departure. As they disappeared beyond the horizon, the battle transformed medium from radar beams and warships to headlines and state television coverage. Venezuelan state media rapidly claimed that the US carrier had been compelled to withdraw, even though naval and AIS intelligence showed the Ford maintained its trajectory. The contradiction suggested that the real victor in the moment was not the force that engaged, but the one that dominated the narrative. From the US side, this event functions as a rehearsal in contemporary maritime encounters. The capability to absorb a provocative dive, register a targeting signal, sustain formation, and respond only when necessary speaks to the evolving nature of power at sea. The deployment of the Ford itself was already a major escalation in the region. Reports describe more than a dozen US Navy vessels advancing into the Caribbean in a campaign the Pentagon designated Operation Southern Shield. Warfare today isn't exclusively about ordnance and missiles. It's about who detects whom first, who documents the moment, authority of the skies, authority of the seas, and authority of the narrative. When one side dives low and another maintains trajectory, the outcome is less about damage inflicted and more about power established. As the Venezuelan jets disappeared into the horizon and the US carrier strike formation steadied its trajectory, the quiet rhythm of the sea did not mean the event was concluded. What followed transitioned into a different arena, a battle of narratives. In Caracas, state television broadcast live with a headline that echoed through Latin America and into Washington. The USS Gerald R. Ford had been compelled to withdraw from the region. The broadcaster claimed that the powerful US supercarrier retreated under pressure. Yet, the intelligence painted a different reality. Automatic identification system signals and published US Navy movements demonstrated the carrier maintained its bearing without deviation. According to Reuters, the Ford's deployment in the region was a clear escalation of American naval presence. The US Navy itself characterized the incident not as a combat defeat, but rather as a calculated show of force operation, meant to deter, not engage. In essence, Venezuela's media narrative aimed at constructing a symbolic victory. By broadcasting that the Ford had withdrawn, Caracas sought to enhance national pride and signal to a domestic audience that the regime remained defiant. On the other side, the United States demonstrated that it did not need to discharge a weapon or reverse course to assert power. The ancient principle of displaying strength without striking played out in real time across the silent waves of the Caribbean. Behind the scenes, the US military concentration off Venezuela's coast was already drawing scrutiny. Analysts characterized the Ford's arrival as the largest American military buildup in the Caribbean in decades. The objective, as stated by the Pentagon, was to disrupt narcotics trafficking and degrade transnational criminal organizations in the region. From the US standpoint, the carrier's steady trajectory symbolized discipline under provocation. The doctrine of naval power often emphasizes that the greatest act of strength is to sustain the mission when threatened, not to abandon it. In refusing to alter trajectory, the Ford strike group transmitted a silent communication. They would not be displaced from station by aerial theatrics. The underlying calculation was that a carrier's value lies not exclusively in its weapons, but in its presence. By avoiding escalation, the United States avoided a full-blown crisis. The event became a lesson in authority rather than combat. The Ford's capability to absorb the dive, track the jets, launch interceptors, and then continue on its way intact illustrated the contemporary measure of naval dominance, resilience under pressure. For Venezuela, the narrative of forcing a US retreat served multiple purposes. It revitalized domestic messaging for Nicolás Maduro's government at a moment of economic hardship. It allowed Caracas to portray itself as an actor capable of standing up to the world's largest military power. And by triggering a reaction from the US, Venezuela reframed the incident as a symbolic win. However, beneath the surface, the real contest was not who engaged first, but who controlled the aftermath. Once the jets were gone, the carrier group returned to routine operations, and the Ford's trajectory remained unchanged. Meanwhile, Venezuela flooded its state media feeds with claims of American retreat. It was a reminder that in the era of hybrid zone warfare, the weaponized medium is often the narrative itself. And yet the ultimate question lingers: why did Venezuela accept the hazard in the first place? When a small fleet of older Kate Seconds challenged a carrier strike group, they invited scrutiny and created intelligence for analysis. By compelling the US to reveal how it reacted, Venezuela treated the incident as a probe rather than a battle. They risked miscalculation because the upside, winning the narrative, was higher than the cost of escalation. In the end, when the noise of the engines faded and the horizon returned to its normal quiet line, what remained was not the dive, the lock-on, or even the media battle. It was the intention behind it all. For Venezuela, the objective was never to eliminate a US carrier. It was to capture a moment. By pushing older K-8 aircraft into the path of the world's most advanced strike group, Caracas generated footage that could be replayed and framed as proof of defiance. State outlets later portrayed the encounter as a sign that their pilots were ready to face a superpower. This fit a familiar pattern noted by Reuters, which reported in November 2025 that Venezuela often uses military theatrics to reinforce the image of national resistance during times of political pressure. Yet, the American response revealed something far more enduring. The USS Gerald R maintained its trajectory, the escort vessels sustained formation, and the US Navy selected discipline over escalation, demonstrating that strength is measured not only by capability, but by authority. The carrier's advanced radar, defensive range, and air-wing readiness showed a force that did not need to react loudly to prove its superiority. The incident became a clear contrast between symbolic power and real operational dominance. As the strike group continued its mission, a question lingered over the water. If you were the commander on the bridge of the USS Ford that morning, would you have maintained trajectory as the US Navy did, or taken a more forceful approach? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to Military Power for more deep dives into the military events shaping our world today.